Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, Capital Markets Analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Back with us is Robert Laurie. He's with Lucem Law up in Vancouver, British Columbia to talk about the Headset Report for BC Market Insights. Rob, thanks for being back with us.
Thank you, Josh. Pleasure to be here.
So we've got some BC numbers here that I wanted to dive in real quick, and then we'll compare that to some other provinces as well as some states in the U.S. on a spreadsheet that I've kind of thrown together. I'm surprised at how low the numbers are. It's 85% lower than Washington State, but that's probably because of the massive slow rollout for stores. So just looking at the average item price at $25 and the fact that they've only sold maybe $800,000 in September, it's $500,000 in September and $800,000 in November. So it's really low numbers. The average item price is decent, but the volume is still really low. Do you attribute that to the lack of retail stores?
Definitely. I mean, lack of stores, lack of sales. But, compare BC to Alberta. Alberta is an alcohol state. It has private liquor stores. You can buy booze and, beer and grocery stores. It's actually more comparable to Washington State with respect to alcohol. Well, Alberta really embraced this whole cannabis, and they've treated it like a business. And because the oil sector hasn't been hot the last couple of years, well, Alberta has really embraced cannabis. I mean, they've almost become like the Texas of weed in Canada, just because, Albertans, like Texans, they think big and they like to achieve big challenges. Well, yeah, they have embraced this quote unquote new legalization, because they didn't really have any type of an industry before. Everything was coming over the Rocky Mountains from British Columbia on buses, backpacks, shipping, whatever, right? That's still kind of the case for most of the country. They're still getting a lot of their weed from BC. British Columbia, on the other hand, the rollout was much slower. The provincial office of John Horgan, who's the premier of British Columbia, I mean, they were really slow and really behind, and almost like, I don't know, they weren't even being frog marched toward having to come up with something. It's just they were reluctant to do it, and they were slow. And what they came up with is, well, it's not really natural. It's kind of like, I don't want to use a crude metaphor, but if we were all having sex without condoms in British Columbia, it's like the BC government have come in and said, oh, you got to use condoms. And, well, people aren't used to that. And they're not really cool with it, even what the government is saying how to do it, because the way the government's doing it is clearly shows they've never fucked before, let alone using condoms. So that's where I think the problem is that we have the industry. The industry hasn't gone anywhere. It's called BC Bud. The black market is the BC industry. And so what these numbers you have on your screen aren't showing you how much was spent in the illegal market in British Columbia. And people are buying weed. They're just, to be honest, reluctant to go down to a government store and also use a credit card or another form of payment processing that leaves their name on a record that is shared with United States law enforcement through multilateral treaty agreement. So for me, I remember I told my wife, she was like, oh, you want to go to the cannabis store? And I'm like, yeah, let's go take out some cash. And if we are going to buy anything, right, then we'll use that to keep our name and our financial information off the record. And that's just it. There are some implications of buying weed. I mean, you don't know if that border officer has somehow now, your credit card information isn't linked to some database that CBP at Department of Homeland can pull up. And then now you're faced with, do I lie to a person in authority or do I tell the truth? And you don't know, right, what info they have. So it's putting people in a dangerous position. And again, what they're selling in these legal stores is double, sometimes triple than what you can find on the black market for just the bog standard product. So again, people are kind of like the old paste pecani sauce adverts. So like, this weed was grown in New York City, right? Not by folks in San Antonio who know what pecani sauce should taste like. And that's kind of like we're like with the weed. It's like this LP shit was made in Ontario by Guatemalans who aren't here anymore. So that I think has busted up a lot of the LP mystique, and the product just is not what British Columbians, have come to know and love and respect and take pride in. And the other reason is well, cannabis is federally regulated and licensed in Canada, which means a BC company has to apply to Ottawa for a license to do effectively something that amounts to trade and industry in British Columbia. And trade and industry is regulated by the provinces, not the federal government. Problem is cannabis has been a controlled drug and a controlled substance and regulated from the Narcotic Control Act right through to the CDSA and more recently the Cannabis Act. And so that's one of the reasons why in Canada we do not have a single securities regulator like the SEC in the States or the FSA in England. No, we got the BC, the Alberta, the Ontario, the Saskatchewan, the separate securities regulators because of our constitutional system. And why we don't have a single sole regulator is because you think Alberta is going to forfeit the control of oil, which is, again, the oil is controlled through the buying and trading of public companies. You think they're going to delegate that, like Texas oil, to Ontario? No, absolutely not. Just like in BC, are we going to delegate licensing for forestry, mining, agriculture, tourism, film industry to Ottawa? No, but in the case of cannabis, we literally have a foreign government telling us you got to grow weed this way and you got to sell it this way. Or no, you got to grow and produce it this way, but we'll let you come up with your own way of how you're going to distribute it. And that's where BC effectively came up with this real complicated way of distributing it that put the government at the central hub on a system where they weren't even involved before. And that's really it, is the government is way too involved. It's way too restricted. It's way too controlled. It just feels odd. And so, yeah, for the average British Columbian, they can call Joe the dealer or Bob down the street or Susie who's got a medical license and is growing way too much. And guess what? They'll have their weed dropped off or picked up or available, which is what you won't get if you're trying to get weed from Uruguay or Jamaica or Morocco right now with all these travel restrictions. So these BC numbers, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think they'll grow slightly, but again, without understanding the context of like, well, what are the black markets numbers for consumption? The legal numbers in BC will look even lower and have even more context. And so that's my thinking is, hey, government comes up, if they come up with a sensible program with sensible products at sensible prices, then maybe they got a fighting chance. But at the moment, right, the bets are all off and it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are pretty pathetic here looking at 6 months worth of sales of pre-rolls at, 7.8 million in sales. That's pretty bad. But to your point, Alberta is 50% more sales than British Columbia. But it's still, British Columbia is only 15% of Washington's sales.
But with all due respect, the Albertans, I mean, weed's new to them. I mean, they're creating an industry. I mean, my hat is off to them. But the problem is well, they're kind of like the lobsters in the pot. And they don't realize the water's getting hot and it's boiling, but yet they're happy to run with this new legal industry and implement it, well, allegedly better than other provinces. But I think at the end of the day, good news, well, that's, bad news for Alberta, because if they end up adjusting and changing and other provinces end up doing other methods of production and licensing, well, yeah, that model's probably going to get left in the cold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it looks like from an average item price by category, it is following the trends of over time prices kind of coming down back to normal. The increase in pre-rolls could be the addition of concentrates, so infused pre-rolls, whereas
not in Canada. No, you can't mix the like pre-rolls have to have just cannabis in it. Extracts came out recently, of course, but there's no combining extracts with the joints. I mean, I've seen that in the States, and you used to see that all over all around. Like they'd have these super joints that would be like rolled with keef and hash inside, then with shatter, covered with Rick Simpson CBD or THC, Phoenix tears, and then dipped and rolled in something with moon rocks added. It just started getting ridiculous where you'd see this like $50 joint, but it had a lot of value to it. But that's the thing, you can only smoke so much of that before you kind of hit maximum capacity, where anything else is you're just going to waste it. It's like taking too many vitamin supplements. You're just going to kind of urinate out the excess, and you only achieve so much of a benefit.
Yeah, I wonder why these pre-rolls went up 50%. It looks like they were about $10 in September and then hit about $15 in November.
Scarcity. It reminds me of that old Eddie Murphy bit, and I think it was like Delirious or Raw, and they're talking about like crackers, and it's like women, and they'll be like, oh my God, that wasn't no ordinary cracker, was that a saltine? And I mean, when you're dealing with starving people, right, like the analogy, and you put McDonald's in front of them, and they'll pay a premium thing and tell you it was the best goddamn thing they ever ate. And that's kind of how they're approaching cannabis. Is they don't know what they're doing. They finally get access to something. They don't know what it is. And they're just excited that they're one of the few that lined up for hours getting to buy something that now they can engage in and participate in legally, unless they're South Korean, without any form of repercussion. And that's cool with them. But more over time, they're going to look and go, wow, I really got abused by that producer and that system. And I think more people are going, well, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I'm just going to go back to the black market. Yeah. Why bring sand to the beach?
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. I want to thank my guest, Robert Laurie with Lucem Law up in Vancouver, British Columbia. Appreciate you being back on the podcast. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.